The text from my mother arrived as I stood in the Seattle airport terminal. It read, "You are not coming. Your father wants just real family." They had given my $45,000 anniversary gift to my brother's father-in-law. Then, my phone chimed again. My corporate card was actively being swiped for $12,000 in luxury Glacier gear. I did not shed a single tear. I just opened my laptop and froze the account. Hello, listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can pay their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment below. My name is Kira Hubbard. I am 34 years old, and I am the founder and CEO of AeroShift Dynamics, a premier supply chain software firm based in Chicago. Right now, I am standing in the middle of the Seattle International Airport, holding a boarding pass I will never use. I had orchestrated and entirely funded a luxury glacier expedition in Alaska to celebrate my parents' wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a grand gesture to finally earn a sliver of their affection. Instead, it became the exact moment I saw my family for the parasites they truly were. The terminal was buzzing with the chaotic energy of thousands of travelers, but the world around me went dead silent when my phone vibrated. It was a text message from my mother, Brenda. I stared at the bright screen, letting the cruel words burn into my mind. She wrote that I was no longer welcome on the trip. According to her, my father, Tom, had decided he wanted an environment strictly reserved for true, real family. As if that was not enough of a brutal slap in the face, she casually mentioned that my $45,000 ticket, the one I had paid for with my own blood, sweat, and grueling late nights, had been transferred to a man named Marcus. Marcus is the father-in-law of my older brother, Derek. I stood frozen by the departure gate, processing the sheer audacity of the message. My own parents had stolen a 5-figure luxury vacation from me to entertain a man I barely knew, all under the sickening guise of authentic family bonding. But before the emotional sting could even properly register in my chest, my phone chimed again, and then again, and again. A relentless cascade of push notifications from my corporate American Express card began flooding my lock screen. $12,000 swiped at a luxury outdoor outfitter in Anchorage. $6,000. $500 for premium glacier climbing gear. $8,000 for a first-class private helicopter transfer service. In a matter of seconds, tens of thousands of dollars were being aggressively drained from my corporate accounts. They were not just taking my vacation away from me, they were actively going on a grotesque shopping spree on my dime while I was stranded in Seattle. I did not shed a single tear. There was absolutely no time for heartbreak. The icy-ass, unwavering logic that had allowed me to build a massive tech empire from the ground up instantly took over my brain. I hit the call button on my father's contact. He picked up on the third ring, the unmistakable sound of clinking crystal glasses echoing through the speaker. "What do you want, Kira?" Tom asked, his tone dripping with heavy condescension. "We are trying to get settled in and enjoy our drinks. You took my $45,000 ticket, gave it to Marcus, and now you are charging tens of thousands of dollars in helicopter rides and designer gear to my corporate card," I stated, keeping my voice dangerously calm and level. "Explain yourself right now." My father sighed heavily, treating me like a bothersome, petulant child, interrupting adults. "Oh, calm down and stop being so dramatic. You have way more money than you know what to do with. You are nothing but an emotionless work machine anyway. You would have just spent the whole trip glued to your laptop, ruining the vacation vibe for everyone else. Marcus actually knows how to enjoy life. We are just using that emergency corporate card you gave us to make sure the trip is perfect. Consider it your financial contribution to the real family." In the background, I heard a familiar, nasal laugh. It was Derek, the undeniable golden child of the Hubbard family, chuckling at my expense. "Tell the ATM to stop crying and let us drink our expensive champagne," Derek yelled out, followed by more raucous, mocking laughter from my father. "Understood," I said quietly, and ended the call. Not a single tear fell from my eyes. The lingering, desperate attachment I had held on to for my parents and my brother completely evaporated in that very second, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I realized with absolute clarity that this was not a case of parental favoritism or emotional rejection. This was a blatant, calculated financial heist. They viewed me not as a human being, not as a daughter or a sister, but simply as a bottomless bank account they felt fully entitled to plunder. I gripped the handle of my carry-on bag, turned my back on the boarding gate, and walked directly toward the first-class airline lounge. The chaotic noise of the airport faded away as I stepped inside and found a secluded leather chair in the far corner. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure Wi-Fi. The pathetic era of seeking their approval was permanently over. As a seasoned CEO who had survived vicious corporate battles, I knew exactly how to handle hostile takeovers and greedy leeches. My family had just declared war on my assets, completely underestimating the woman they were stealing from. I abandoned my flight to Alaska, logged into my master financial dashboard, and officially launched a massive, scorched earth financial purge. They wanted a luxury vacation without the emotionless work machine. They were about to find out exactly how ruthlessly efficient that machine could truly be. The ambient noise of the first-class lounge faded into an absolute, sterile silence as I initiated a secure virtual private network tunnel directly into the encrypted mainframe of AeroShift Dynamics. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the lethal precision of a surgeon about to excise a malignant tumor. I was no longer a discarded daughter. I was a chief executive officer conducting a hostile audit on her own flesh and blood. I bypassed the standard user interfaces and went straight into the raw database, pulling up the comprehensive transaction history for the supplemental corporate card I had issued to my parents 3 years ago. The rules for that card had been explicitly clear. It was authorized strictly for catastrophic medical emergencies, emergency home repairs, or unexpected travel crises. For a long time, the ledger had shown nothing but minor, acceptable charges, a copay at the cardiologist for my father, a deductible for my mother's dental surgery, perhaps a modest plumbing bill. But as I applied a forensic data filter to the last 18 months, the numbers began to bleed red across my screen. My analytical algorithms instantly flagged a massive, glaring anomaly. There was a systematic pattern of heavy, recurring outgoing wire transfers and corporate card payments funneled to a series of obscure, newly registered vendor accounts. The names on the invoices were completely fabricated. They used vague, professional-sounding monikers like Apex Logistics Solutions and Horizon Structural Consulting. I ran a swift cross-reference check on the state business registry for these supposed vendors. The results made my jaw tighten. Every single one of these phantom companies was registered to a single post office box in a rundown industrial park in suburban Chicago. It was the exact same address as a failing craft brewery that my brother, Derek, had stubbornly started a 1.5 years ago. Derek fancied himself an artisanal brewmaster, but his business was an absolute disaster, bleeding capital from day one due to his sheer incompetence and laziness. I highlighted the fraudulent invoices and calculated the total sum. My father and my brother had methodically generated fake contractor bills to siphon company funds right under my nose. Over the course of 12 months, they had embezzled over $150,000 from my corporate reserves, dumping every single cent into Derek's sinking ship of a brewery just to keep the lights on and his bruised ego intact. They were not just greedy, they were sloppy. The digital paper trail they left behind was laughably amateurish, but the discovery of the stolen $150,000 was merely the appetizer in this feast of betrayal. My intuition, sharpened by years of navigating corporate espionage, screamed that if they were brazen enough to steal operating capital, they had likely targeted my hard assets as well. I immediately shifted my focus away from the company accounts and opened my personal real estate portfolio. My most valuable non-liquid asset was a sprawling, luxury alpine ranch located in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I had purchased the property under a private corporate umbrella named Summit Ridge Holdings, a limited liability company in which I was the sole managing director. I had graciously allowed my parents to live in the magnificent timber and glass estate entirely rent-free, covering their property taxes, their utilities, and their maintenance costs. I logged into the Teton County Public Records database to verify the deed and the current title status of the ranch. What I found on the screen made my blood run ice cold. Attached to the pristine title of my multi-million-dollar estate was a massive, active lien. Someone had taken out a severe, high-yield collateralized loan against the equity of my property. I quickly downloaded the digitized mortgage agreement from the county server and zoomed in on the final page of the contract. Right there, neatly printed on the dotted line, was my signature, authorizing the property to be used as collateral. But it was not my handwriting, it was a crude, blatant digital forgery. My father had taken a scanned copy of an old tax return, cropped my signature, and illegally superimposed it onto a legally binding financial contract. He and Derek had committed outright identity theft and real estate fraud, leveraging the roof over their own heads to secure a massive injection of shadow capital. I kept reading the fine print of the loan document, tracing the origin of the funds. This was not a standard loan from an established commercial bank or a reputable credit union. The terms were brutally predatory, carrying a staggering 25% compounding interest rate with brutal penalty clauses for late payments. This was black market money. This was a loan shark. I scrolled back up to the top of the deed of trust to identify the private lender holding the note on my Wyoming ranch. I stared at the name of the principal underwriter, and the final, missing piece of the puzzle violently snapped into place. The registered lender was a private asset management trust controlled by Marcus, the exact same Marcus who was currently enjoying a $45,000 first-class vacation in Alaska at my expense, the father-in-law of my thieving brother. The sheer gravity of the conspiracy hit me like a freight train. My family had not simply given Marcus my ticket out of some misplaced sense of familial bonding. Marcus was their unlicensed loan shark. Derek's pathetic brewery must have collapsed even with the $150,000 they stole from me, forcing them to borrow dangerous money from Marcus to cover their tracks. When the predatory interest rates caught up with them, my father panicked and forged my signature to offer my Wyoming ranch as collateral to keep Marcus at bay. And now, unable to make the crushing cash payments, they were using my corporate credit cards to fund a lavish, obscenely expensive glacier expedition for Marcus. The entire trip was nothing but a desperate, luxurious bribe. They were treating their loan shark to premium helicopter rides and designer climbing gear to appease him and buy themselves more time. My parents and my brother had seamlessly transitioned from being entitled freeloaders into a fully operational, interstate financial crime syndicate. They were laundering my corporate funds, committing wire fraud, forging federal documents, and engaging in extortion, all while laughing at me over the phone and calling me an emotionless work machine. I leaned back in the leather chair, staring at the damning evidence glowing on my laptop screen. A dangerous, predatory calmness settled over my entire body. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they could use my wealth to shield themselves from the consequences of their own spectacular failures. They were dead wrong. I reached for my cell phone, ready to initiate a sequence of events that would completely annihilate their entire existence. I shifted my attention to the live flight tracker pulsing on my secondary monitor. The commercial jet carrying my parents, my brother, his wife, and their loan shark was currently cruising somewhere over the rugged Canadian Rockies. According to the aviation telemetry, they were scheduled to touch down at the Juneau International Airport in exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. From the tarmac, a private shuttle would transport them to the ultra-exclusive glacier resort they had booked on my dime. I knew the strict operational protocols of that specific resort intimately, mainly because I was the one who had originally negotiated the high-end corporate booking. The concierge desk maintained an unbending policy. Before a single room key was handed over, they required a physical credit card swipe to secure a mandatory $15,000 deposit for incidental damages and premium wilderness excursions. My father was undoubtedly counting on my corporate American Express to effortlessly clear that hurdle. I opened my primary banking administrative portal, my eyes scanning the dashboard with predatory focus. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, I located the supplemental card issued to Tom Hubbard. I did not merely freeze the account. A temporary freeze is a soft measure, one that can sometimes be overridden by a sympathetic bank manager if an angry, entitled client complains loudly enough over the phone. Instead, I permanently locked the account and manually adjusted the available credit limit down to exactly $1. Next, I initiated a severe emergency fraud protocol with the Fraud Prevention Department of my corporate bank. I filed an official, legally binding dispute regarding the tens of thousands of dollars they had just spent on helicopter transfers and luxury climbing gear back in Anchorage. I flagged every single one of those transactions as unauthorized corporate theft. The bank's security algorithms responded instantly. They locked down every secondary account tied to my master profile, completely severing my family's access to my company's cash flow. The financial guillotine had officially dropped, but merely cutting off their current funding was nowhere near enough. I needed to systematically dismantle the very foundation they had stolen from me. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct, unlisted line of my chief in-house counsel, David. He answered on the very first ring. "David, I am activating a catastrophic asset liquidation protocol," I said, my voice leaving absolutely zero room for debate or hesitation. "I need you to legally dissolve the occupancy agreement for the Jackson Hole property immediately. Then, I want you to contact the aggressive acquisition team at the Blackwood Agricultural Conglomerate. They have been trying to buy my Wyoming ranch for 3 years to expand their industrial cattle grazing territory. Tell them I am willing to sell the entire estate to them at a 20% discount off the current market value. But the deal comes with one non-negotiable condition. They must wire the funds in full and take aggressive physical possession of the property within the next 24 hours. David paused, the silence on the line heavy as he processed the sheer aggression of my order. "Kira, if we sell to Blackwood, they will not preserve the estate. They will send security teams to clear the premises, bulldoze the luxury guest houses, and gut the main lodge by tomorrow night. What about your parents? All their personal belongings, their furniture, their entire lives are still inside that house. They no longer reside there," I replied coldly, feeling not a single ounce of pity. "Draw up the eviction papers and execute the sale immediately. Do not call me back until the deed is permanently transferred and the money is in my holding account." I ended the call and immediately turned my attention to compiling a comprehensive digital dossier. I methodically gathered the fraudulent contractor invoices Derek had used to launder my money into his failing business. I attached the high-resolution scans of the forged mortgage agreement bearing my counterfeited signature. I included the banking routing numbers that proved the illicit funds were being used to pay off predatory black market loans to Marcus. I organized every single piece of damning evidence into a meticulously indexed, heavily encrypted file. I did not bother sending this to local law enforcement, where it might get buried in bureaucratic paperwork. I routed the entire package directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Utilizing a secure whistleblower portal I had access to through my corporate compliance network, I uploaded the dossier and hit send. With that single click, I officially handed my father and my brother over to the federal government for prosecution. There was only one final loose end left to tie up. I navigated to the luxury airline's ticketing platform and pulled up their master travel itinerary. With deliberate, immensely satisfying clicks, I highlighted all 5 of their first-class return tickets to Chicago and hit the cancellation button. I reclaimed tens of thousands of dollars straight back into my company's treasury. I made absolutely sure to void any associated frequent flyer miles and explicitly blacklisted their names from ever rebooking under my corporate account. My family was about to land in an unforgiving, freezing wilderness thousands of miles away from home. They had no valid credit cards, no return tickets, no cash reserves, and absolutely no idea that the luxury house they thought they owned was currently being sold to a ruthless corporate rival. Every single trap I had set on both ends of the country was fully armed, perfectly synchronized, and locked into place. There were no loopholes, no avenues for negotiation, and absolutely no way out. All I had to do now was sit back in the quiet comfort of the airport lounge, watch the flight tracker slowly tick down to 0, and wait for the frantic phone calls to begin. Exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes after I initiated the total financial lockdown, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the polished obsidian table of the airport lounge. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let the phone vibrate across the table, taking a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute power of this moment. On the 5th ring, I finally swiped to answer and brought the device to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited. "Kira, thank God you picked up," Brenda hissed. Her voice was a tight, frantic whisper, completely stripped of the arrogant, entitled tone she had carried just a few hours prior. "Something is horribly wrong with the corporate card. The front desk manager here is being incredibly unhelpful and rude. He keeps swiping the card for the mandatory $15,000 incidentals deposit, and the machine just keeps spitting back a declined message. It says the account is frozen. You need to call your bank right this second and clear this up. Marcus is standing right behind us, and this is becoming extremely embarrassing." Through the receiver, I could clearly hear the ambient sounds of the ultra-luxury Glacier Resort in the background, the soft playing of a grand piano in the lounge, the low murmur of wealthy guests sipping champagne, and the icy, polite voice of the concierge insisting that they needed a valid form of payment immediately to release the room keys. "The card is not malfunctioning." "Mother," I replied, my voice as cold and flat as the Alaskan tundra waiting for them outside. "I locked the account. I manually adjusted the credit limit to $1. You have no more access to my company's funds." "What are you talking about?" Brenda gasped, her voice rising in pitch and volume, drawing unwanted attention in the quiet, opulent lobby. "You cannot do this to us. We are in the middle of nowhere. Fix this right now." "I am not fixing anything," I stated with absolute, surgical precision. "Because I know everything. I know about the $150,000 Tom and Derek siphoned out of my company using those pathetic, fabricated invoices for Apex Logistics Solutions. I know every single stolen cent went straight into Derek's massive failure of a craft brewery to keep it afloat. And, most importantly, I pulled the public property records for my Wyoming ranch. I saw the counterfeit signature Tom used to secure a black market mortgage on a property he does not even legally own. The line went dead silent. The only sound was my mother's ragged, terrified breathing. The realization that their entire criminal enterprise had been completely unmasked struck her like a physical blow. "Put me on speakerphone. Brenda," I commanded. "Do it right now, or I will hang up the phone and you will never speak to me again." I heard the frantic rustle of the phone being pulled away from her ear, followed by a faint electronic beep. The audio quality shifted abruptly, and I knew I now had an audience. I could hear Tom angrily asking what was going on, and Derek's nervous shifting. "Marcus, I know you are listening," I said, projecting my voice loud and clear so it would echo from the phone speaker for the entire group to hear. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. The exorbitant interest payments that my father and my brother have been handing you over the past 6 months did not come from their personal pockets. That was stolen corporate money. They embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from my supply chain software firm to pay off your predatory loans. And they used a forged federal real estate deed to do it. By accepting those funds, they have officially implicated you in a massive interstate money laundering and wire fraud conspiracy. The Federal Bureau of Investigation currently has the entire dossier, including your name and your trust account routing numbers." The explosion of chaos that erupted on the other end of the line was absolute music to my ears. Marcus, a man who operated in the profitable but highly illegal shadows of high-interest lending, instantly recognized the catastrophic danger of federal scrutiny. He knew that the government tracing stolen corporate funds into his shadow accounts would mean decades in federal prison. "You absolute idiots!" Marcus roared, his voice booming over the speakerphone, completely shattering the quiet elegance of the resort lobby. "You paid me with dirty corporate money? You dragged my private trust into a federal embezzlement scheme?" "Marcus, wait, please. We can explain. It is just a massive misunderstanding," Tom stammered, his usual arrogant bravado completely collapsing into pathetic, trembling panic. "Do not speak to me." Marcus snarled viciously. "I am done with you. I am done with all of you. You are completely on your own. Do not ever contact me again, or I will make sure the federal agents are the absolute least of your problems." I heard the heavy, angry footsteps of Marcus storming away from the check-in desk. He began loudly declaring to the resort staff that he was not associated with this group of criminals and demanded a private transport straight back to the airport. He was cutting his losses and abandoning them instantly to save his own skin. Then came the voice of the resort manager, no longer bothering to hide his disdain behind professional courtesy. "Sir, ma'am, since your payment has been decisively declined and your associate has just publicly accused you of severe financial crimes, I must insist that you vacate the premises immediately. Security is already on the way to escort you out. We have zero tolerance for this kind of disturbance in our establishment." "But where are we supposed to go?" Brenda sobbed hysterically. "There is a massive snowstorm outside. You cannot just throw us out into the cold." "That is no longer my problem. Ma'am, please step away from my desk." The manager replied firmly. The sounds of the physical scuffle were unmistakable. The heavy thud of high-end designer suitcases being unceremoniously dumped onto the stone floors. The loud, indignant protests of my father and brother as large resort security guards physically herded them toward the grand glass exit doors. I listened with intense satisfaction as the heavy automatic doors slid open, letting in the howling, freezing wind of a brutal Alaskan blizzard. They were forcefully pushed out onto the freezing, wet pavement, and the doors locked securely behind them. "Kira, please," Derek begged, grabbing the phone from our mother, his voice cracking with absolute desperation as the freezing rain began to pelt them. "We are out on the street. We cannot book another hotel because our secondary cards are all frozen. We checked the airline application, and all of our return flights have been canceled. We have absolutely nothing. You have to send us some money." "I do not have to do anything," I said coldly. "Enjoy the authentic family bonding." Before I could press the end call button, the ultimate fracture occurred. Derek's wife, who had just watched her own father abandon her and realized her husband was a federal criminal who had just stranded her in a blizzard, completely snapped. "You lied to me," she screamed at Derek at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and echoing over the howling wind. "You told me the brewery was a massive financial success. You told me this trip was a luxury gift. You are nothing but a pathetic, lying thief. My father warned me about you." "Shut up and let me think," Derek yelled back, his golden boy facade completely crumbling into savage, uncontrollable anger. "Do not you dare tell her to shut up," Tom bellowed, instantly turning on his own son. "This is all your fault, Derek. If your stupid craft beer business had not failed so spectacularly, we would not have had to borrow money from that criminal father-in-law of yours in the first place." "My fault?" Derek shrieked back at him. "You are the one who forged the signature on the Wyoming house, old man. You are going to federal prison, not me." Brenda just wailed in the background, a high-pitched, continuous sound of absolute, broken despair. They were standing in the freezing slush, surrounded by useless designer luggage they could no longer afford to carry, viciously tearing each other apart on a public sidewalk thousands of miles away from home. I listened to their screaming match for exactly 30 seconds, savoring the glorious, chaotic symphony of their complete and total destruction. Then, with a calm, steady hand, I ended the call and blocked every single one of their numbers permanently. With zero access to my corporate funds, their designer luggage became nothing but useless dead weight in the freezing Alaskan sludge. I tracked the pathetic demise of their finances through the digital breadcrumbs and public records they left behind. To secure a way off the ice, they were forced to drag their frozen, miserable bodies into a dingy, fluorescent-lit pawnshop in downtown Juneau. My father had to unbuckle his prized 18-karat gold Rolex, a watch he proudly flaunted at exclusive country clubs, and hand it over to a cynical pawnbroker who gave him less than 10% of its actual retail value. My mother wept openly as she surrendered her diamond tennis bracelet and her vintage Chanel earrings for a few stacks of crumpled $20 bills. They used that pathetic pile of cash to buy the cheapest, most agonizing passage back to Wyoming. There were no private helicopters, no luxury suites, and no first-class lounges waiting for them. Instead, they endured a brutal 4-day odyssey of pure logistical hell. They took a rocky, stomach-churning public ferry through chopping winter waters just to reach a mainland transit hub. From there, they were crammed into the middle seats of deep-discount budget airlines. They suffered through a grueling gauntlet of 3 separate layovers in freezing, overcrowded terminals. They slept on hard plastic chairs, their designer coats stained with cheap airport coffee and grimed with the filth of public transit. My brother, Derek, who had spent the last 2 years pretending to be a wealthy entrepreneurial visionary, now looked like a feral vagrant, angrily demanding free bags of peanuts from exhausted flight attendants because they could not even afford a proper terminal meal. The long, humiliating trek violently stripped away every last shred of their fabricated upper-class dignity. While they were trapped in middle seats somewhere over the Dakotas, my legal team and the Blackwood Agricultural Conglomerate were working with terrifying efficiency. Exactly 24 hours after I authorized the sale, a fleet of heavy black trucks rolled up the long, winding driveway of my Jackson Hole estate. An armed private security detail took absolute, physical possession of the property. With one swift squeeze of heavy industrial bolt cutters, the main gate locks were permanently destroyed. A specialized eviction crew marched into the sprawling timber and glass mansion and systematically dismantled the luxurious life my parents had enjoyed for free. The security team did not care about the sentimental value of my mother's imported porcelain collection or my father's extensive collection of single malt scotch, high-end velvet sofas, custom oil paintings, and wardrobes full of cashmere were haphazardly swept off the shelves, wrapped in cheap industrial plastic, and shoved into unmarked cardboard boxes. The crew loaded their entire existence into the back of a moving truck and dumped it all into a humid, leaky, 10 by 10 storage unit in the poorest district of the county. Then, Blackwood executives made the final call to the utility companies. The massive electrical breakers were violently pulled. The heated floors went ice cold. The main water lines were drained and capped. Within hours, the glowing, warm sanctuary they called home was transformed into a dark, frozen, uninhabitable tomb completely swallowed by the brutal Wyoming winter. Yet, as my family finally boarded their last connecting flight, they clung to one final, pathetic delusion. Depleted, starving, and emotionally shattered, they huddled together in the back row of the plane and convinced themselves that this was all just a temporary temper tantrum. "Kira is just throwing a fit," my mother whispered to the group, her voice shaking but laced with that familiar, toxic manipulation. "She is family. When we get back to the house, we will just call her, offer a few fake tears, and apologize. She always caves in the end. By tomorrow, she will turn the credit cards back on and we can fix this." They actually believed that their empty words could somehow glue the shattered pieces of their free ride back together. They thought they were going home to a warm fire and a fully stocked wine cellar where they could comfortably plot their emotional comeback. It was well past midnight when a battered, rusting yellow taxi finally carried them away from the regional airport. The broken heater in the cab rattled pathetically, barely pushing tepid air into the back seat where the 4 of them were crammed together. Derek's wife sat in stony, traumatized silence, staring out the frosted window, realizing she had married into a family of destitute frauds. The driver navigated the dark, winding mountain roads, the headlights cutting through the dense, swirling snow. The taxi finally jolted to a complete stop at the end of the remote, unlit driveway. They paid the driver with their last remaining handful of wrinkled dollar bills and dragged their heavy, damp suitcases out into the freezing mud. The taillights of the cab faded away into the blackness, leaving them in complete, suffocating silence. They turned around, expecting to see the welcoming, warm glow of the mansion's floodlights guiding them up the path. Instead, they stared into an abyss of absolute, punishing darkness. The true nightmare of their lives was just about to begin. My parents and my brother dragged their frozen, mud-caked luggage up the steep incline of the driveway, their breath pluming in the freezing midnight air. But as they reached the crest, they slammed into a brutal physical barrier, the massive wrought iron gates of the estate, which were usually left wide open in welcoming grace, were now tightly bound by heavy-duty industrial chains and secured with a fist-sized titanium padlock. Bolted directly over the ornate center crest was a stark, aggressive metal sign. It read, "No trespassing. Private property of the Blackwood Agricultural Conglomerate. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Tom stared at the sign, his sleep-deprived, frozen brain utterly refusing to comprehend the words. His trademark arrogance, which had shielded him from reality for his entire life, flared up in a desperate, fiery rage. He refused to believe that he had been officially locked out of his own kingdom. "This is a mistake," Tom growled, dropping his ruined leather suitcase onto the icy asphalt. "She is just trying to scare us. This is still my house." Driven by sheer, unhinged entitlement, he marched over to the stone pillar where the landscaping crew used to leave emergency tools. He grabbed a heavy, rusted steel crowbar. With a wild, desperate shout, my father swung the iron bar directly into the titanium padlock, trying to shatter the mechanism and force his way onto the property. He struck it once, twice, 3 times. The loud metallic clanging echoed violently through the empty canyon. He had absolutely no idea that the moment his crowbar made contact with the gate, he tripped a highly sensitive, silent perimeter alarm system that Blackwood Security had installed just hours earlier. They stood in the freezing slush, waiting for the lock to give way, fully expecting to march inside and reclaim their stolen luxury. Instead, within 4 short minutes, the oppressive darkness of the Wyoming night was violently torn apart by the blinding, strobing glare of red and blue emergency lights. A convoy of local sheriff cruisers and unmarked black federal utility vehicles came roaring up the mountain road, their sirens cutting through the blizzard like a physical blade. The vehicles swerved violently, forming a tight, inescapable semicircle around my terrified family, trapping them against the chained gates. Heavy doors flew open, and a dozen armed officers and federal agents poured out into the snow, shouting aggressively, ordering them to drop the crowbar and raise their hands. My family froze in absolute terror, shielding their eyes from the blinding spotlights. They expected me to step out of one of those vehicles. They expected me to walk up to the gates so they could deploy their rehearsed tears, manipulate my emotions, and beg for forgiveness. But I was absolutely nowhere near that mountain. Instead, my chief in-house counsel, David, stepped out from the warmth of a black federal SUV, closely flanked by 2 senior agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Tom Hubbard and Derek Hubbard," the lead agent announced, his voice booming with absolute, terrifying authority over the howling wind. "You are both under arrest for multiple counts of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and the forging of federal real estate documents." "There is a misunderstanding," Derek shrieked, his voice cracking in absolute panic as he backed away, slipping on the black ice. "We are a family. This is just a family dispute." David adjusted his coat and looked at them with pure, unfiltered disgust. "There is no dispute," David said coldly, "and you have no defense. The moment Marcus realized you had implicated him in a federal money laundering scheme, he drove straight to a field office to secure total immunity for his own trust. Marcus turned over every single text message, every forged signature, and every illegal mortgage document you ever sent him. He handed you over to the government on a silver platter. The ultimate, crushing weight of their betrayal finally collapsed on top of them. The very man they had tried to impress and bribe with my money was the exact person who drove the final nail into their coffins. Officers moved in swiftly. My father, who had spent his life mocking my work ethic and demanding respect, was violently shoved face first into the freezing, muddy snow. Derek sobbed uncontrollably as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly shut around his wrists. Brenda screamed and fell to her knees, watching the two men she enabled and worshipped being dragged away to face decades in federal prison. Their upper-class illusion was completely annihilated, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the freezing wind and the devastating consequences of their own boundless greed, thousands of miles away. I stood in the quiet, climate-controlled elegance of my brand-new luxury penthouse in downtown Chicago. I held a crystal glass of expensive red wine, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the dark, serene expanse of Lake Michigan. The city lights reflected beautifully against the glass. I took a slow, deep sip, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of absolute peace. Aeroshift Dynamics had just reported record-breaking quarterly growth. The toxic leeches that had drained my energy and my finances for years were finally permanently excised from my life. I did not feel an ounce of guilt or sorrow. I had built an empire through flawless logic and ruthless efficiency, looking out over the glittering city skyline. I finally realized that aggressively cutting away the cancerous, toxic tumor that society disguised under the sacred label of family was, without a single doubt, the most brilliant and profitable investment I had ever made in my entire life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Where are you tuning in from today? Please let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and found it satisfying, please consider helping our channel with a contribution of just $1. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description and pinned comment. Your support directly pays the salaries of our hard-working staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating better, more exciting stories for you every single day. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.